Hey everybody, Professor Dust here. Today we're going to do a little introduction to leadership and talk about things such as the difference between leadership, power, and influence, and break down a little bit of the history of what does it mean when we're talking about leadership and some of these potential perspectives of leadership, and really to give you a foundation so that we can start to pick apart all the different variations and approaches and styles to leadership. So let's jump right in. So, first off, when we're talking about leadership, it's important to understand that there are a lot of different definitions and different types of leadership and different styles of leadership. But when we're talking about leadership as a field, the most commonly accepted, all encompassing definition is that leadership, number one, is a process. And then in this process, it's one individual influencing a group of individuals to achieve some common goal. So the key components here are that it's an influence process, right? It's not a person, it's a process, and it has to be influencing a group. And this could be just one other person, and that together then is a group, or it could be two people, or thousands, if not millions of people. And then it also has to be about some degree of a common goal, right? So it has to be some connection or interdependence between the individuals in the group. So a long time ago, when we thought of leadership, we actually were thinking about it more so as a person, and we were thinking about it as, hey, what are the aspects or the traits or the personal characteristics of people that are leaders, and then working backwards. And so, for example, there was things like height, attractiveness, everything from, oh, well, they're just those that are the most intelligent, they're the most talkative, and a variety of other traits. And so the challenge of this perspective of, oh, they just have it, is that number one, it assumes that leadership is innate, right? You have it or you don't have it. And as we'll talk about later, no, leadership is a behavior or a set of behaviors. It is things that you can develop and cultivate over time. Some of the other challenging implications of this prior perspective of leadership was that it was prone to bias. So if someone has this specific characteristic, or said a different way, if someone attempts to make it look like they have a certain characteristic, such as being more fluent or more intelligent, then they're kind of faking it to make it look like as if they should deserve to have this type of authority as a leader. But what we're talking about, and where the literature and the research on leadership is today, is that leadership is a process. It's any type of interactive process between between the two, the leader and the follower. Follower being the most common terminology used when you're talking about leadership research, but it's just anybody that is the recipient of the influence of the other party. And so a lot of what we're interested in is understanding, how do you develop that ideal approach to leadership given the interaction that's going to happen between the two, right? So coming at it from a process perspective. Importantly, the implications of this are that anybody can be a leader. You can develop your leaders, you can understand followers or the people that you are influencing, again, whether that be subordinates or peers, and you can have a better understanding of what should I be doing in order to influence them towards these collective goals. So I want to give you a little bit of a differentiation here on what we think about in terms of leaders. And one of the biggest differentiators is understanding this difference between assigned leadership and emergent leadership. So leadership can manifest from different places. And so when we're talking about assigned leadership, I think this is where a lot of people's heads go at first, right? This is the CEO. They have been assigned a specific role. This is the president of this organization. This is the manager of this specific department. Those are assigned leadership roles. Now, they may have democratically gotten that specific role. They may have gone through an application process to get that role, whatever it might be, but they are still given this specific role with a specific set of implications, responsibilities, roles, protocols, etc. Another manifestation of leadership is when it's emergent. So when someone is influencing others in a way that is perceived to be leadership, or someone within the group grants a person a leadership role, or when a collective says this is the right person for the job to influence us towards wherever we need to go, that is emergent leadership. And so it can come from different angles. And sometimes you might see teams or organizations where there's a combination of assigned leadership as well as emergent leadership that just happens based upon the interaction and the characteristics of the people involved. But that's one important differentiation of where leadership might come from. And so I want to offer an example that gets at both this trait versus process perspective, as well as this difference between assigned and emergent perspective. So I would call this an evidence-based application because this is an experiment that was done a while ago on emerging leaders. So what they did is they put 160 undergraduates into teams, and they put them into teams of 4 or 5 or something like that. And then at T1 or time 1, what they did is they had each person self-rate personality, right? So they just took the big 5 characteristics or something like that. Then they also had them take an intelligence test, like the Likert, or excuse me, the, what's it called? Forget the name of it, but the intelligence test that's commonly used in screening and profiling and everything else. And then at time 2, after everybody had interacted with each other, and after everybody had worked together on a specific project, then they asked everybody within the team or all of the individuals to rate their perceptions of whether the other people on the team were leaders or engaging in leadership-like behaviors. And so what do you think were the characteristics, right? These personality characteristics that were rated at time 1. What types of characteristics do you think were related to that time 2 perception of leadership by the other party? The most common were number 1, dominance, number 2, confidence, and number 3, intelligence. Now, arguably, dominance and confidence aren't necessarily related to performance as a leader. Intelligence, yes, that is something that is relatively important. But these first 2 really don't have a whole lot to do with being a good leader, other than it looks like what a leader should be doing, right? So this is the difference, number 1, between trait leadership and process leadership, right? We assume that leaders are supposed to have certain traits, but what we really want is to understand the process of leadership. And then number 2, this is a great example of the manifestation of leadership through emergent leadership, right? So they're working together and they're evaluating how they're doing, and oh, we think this person should be a leader because of the way that they're interacting, okay? And what are the implications of this? Again, potential biases, potential assumptions on who is being leader-like, the likelihood that people might try and pretend like they are a leader, or that people might engage in specific ways with their team members in order to get the clout that allows them to emerge as a leader, for people to recognize them as a leader. Those aren't necessarily productive processes. So, okay, now let's talk about the difference between leadership and power, because they're not the same thing. Now, they do overlap, but they're not the same. So let's walk through exactly what power is and talk about some of those different types of power. So power can really be broken down into these 2 specific buckets. The first bucket is position power, and the second bucket is personal power. Now, there is some overlap in that a lot of times people with position power have personal power and vice versa. However, you don't always have both of them, and a lot of times you might only have one or the other, right? So it's important to see these differences here. So first off, one type of position power is legitimate power, right? Someone gave this individual legitimate authority or formal authority over some process or people involved, right? So Elon Musk, he's the CEO of SpaceX, Tesla, and SolarCity. He has legitimate power over certain aspects of the business. And that's all built into the arrangement, given the contract and the ownership and the shares and everything else. Joe Biden, our current president, also has legitimate power. There's a democratic process in place that says he can do this, he can't do that, given these specific boundaries of the legal system, right? That is legitimate power. That is more of the title or the position that they have. The second type of position power is reward power. So this is a picture of the department chair for the management department, Brian Aschenbaum, and this is Jenny Derrick, the dean of the Farmer School of Business. They have reward power over me as an employee, not over me, but they have reward power that can influence me. They have control over resources, rewards, right? These 2, because there's my direct manager per se at the department level, and then within that is the business school, they have power in that they are in charge of dictating, to some degree, what types of merit increases people get, what type of opportunities people get to earn more money and get new teaching opportunities. They have reward power over promotion and tenure. All of these things are part of reward power, right? You're motivated to do things because they can kind of say, hey, I know that you want this. Now, the opposite of reward power, another type of position power, would be coercive power. This is where you have control over punishments. So think of this as you could fire people, you can give people, you could demote people, you could give them, what else is a common form of punishment? You could give them worse opportunities. You might kind of send them to locations that nobody else wants. These are all form of coercive power. My favorite example is Coach K, who was the coach for one of the most amazing basketball teams in history, the USA Olympic team. And he had all these amazing all-stars on his team. In theory, he had very little power over these people. These people were volunteering to be a part of this Olympic team and offer their talents to help the country. But there was one form of power that Coach K did have over these individuals: coercive power. If you want to be in the game, if you want to be playing and not on the bench, you got to abide by my rules, right? Otherwise, I have the authority to say they're in, they're out. Right? So that's another form of coercive power. Another form of position power. The fourth type of position power is information power. This is when a specific individual has information in their possession that other people would really, really, really like to access. So one example is Eric Snowden. So a former intelligence officer. He worked for the CIA and a few other entities where over time he garnered access to all sorts of systems, critical information, and it ended up being one of the biggest leaks in CIA history. Well, he had a lot of power because he had lots of information that people wanted access to, right? So he didn't necessarily have a lot of legitimate power, reward power, or anything like that, but he did have access to a lot of information, which gave him lots of leverage and lots of opportunities. Now, moving to the other side in terms of personal power, the first type of personal power is expert power. And this is when you have some type of knowledge, skill, expertise, something that you know how to do that other people would like to know how to do, right? You are an expert in some specific capacity. And this is a lot of what we're trying to do when we're teaching people different things, right? You are becoming an expert in this specific topic and you have power and influence. People will listen to you, people will hire you because you have this specific knowledge or skill set. An example that I love is Sheryl Sandberg, Chief Operating Officer of Facebook, who is one of the few female executives at the C-suite level for publicly traded entities in one of the most powerful industries in the world, technology. So she has a very, very unique niche position, unfortunately, right? Ideally, it would be 50% male, 50% female. But she has a really interesting view on what it's like to be in her specific role. So she used that power, leveraged that power to create leanin.org, where she teaches and can and use that platform to inspire and to help. There's a whole network opportunity and affiliation opportunity to help females engage in leadership development and offer more opportunities, right? So she has that degree of power because of her experience. Another form of expert power is referent power. And this comes, this is a hard one because it comes from a variety of different sources. But what it really comes down to is the people that are people want to identify with. Think of this as the influencers, right? If you use a social media term of society. The best example out there is Oprah Winfrey. People just are drawn to her based upon a variety of things that she's done. She's been successful. She's a nice person. She does good things. She's rich, you name it. She has all these different ways that give her this hard to explain gestalt construct of referent power, where people want to be associated with her. If she puts her Oprah Book Club stamp on a book, it explodes because everybody wants to read what Oprah is reading. That's personal power. So before we get into this, position power and personal power, again, they're not one and the same. So we know that to some degree, they might be a small correlation, but they're definitely different. But if you think about these different types of power, the 4 position powers are more likely to be correlated. They're likely to be similar, right? So people that have legitimate power probably have some degree of personal power, of reward power, and of coercive power, and vice versa. Same with the other side for personal power types, right? So they kind of hang together to some degree. So it's important to recognize that there's been a shift in power over time. And we're starting to see this maybe in the last 10 years or so, where you're starting to see less power from these hierarchical legitimate positions and more power to those that are at lower levels of the organization. So followers are more capable of acquiring personal power than ever before. They can become experts. They can become influencers or referent power type experts within their own domain. Technology has also really empowered followers, partly because it enables them to learn and to influence and reach out to the masses, which traditionally has only been done by legitimate power. But it also enables them to spread the word and to have a platform and a voice and everything else where they can talk to other people that don't necessarily have power. So if you really think about the evolution, we are in the knowledge economy, right? And in a knowledge economy, so we start with agricultural, industrial, service economy, the knowledge economy. Arguably now we're in the data-driven economy or the interpretation of data economy, whatever you want to call it. When that really is your source of power, that is really where the money is going and where the interest is going. Individuals, because technology is readily accessible, anybody can access the internet, right? It's not only the people that have money. It's not only the people that were that know certain people because of their family or resources. Technology is empowering and is taking some of the power or shifting some of the power away to everybody else. With this, followers are starting to expect more from their leaders. And so because there's this shift, now there's a little bit of a higher threshold for what good leadership looks like and what we might expect out of our leaders. We expect leaders to be more transparent than we ever have before. There's also a little bit of a decline in respect for leaders in that you are less likely to see people that put them on the pedestal as being perfect. The leaders might have to prove that they're doing good things first before people assume that they're doing good things. And so to offer a quick example of how this shift is taking place, there's a little bit of a social contract between leaders and the non-leaders in this expectation of you're going to be fair. And so this image here, I took when I was at Zuccotti Park in New York when Occupy Wall Street was going on. And the argument, I kind of walked around and talked to a few people. Here's the information media desk at this makeshift camp they created. And just saying, like, why are people upset? And the number one response, the consensus a lot of time was that, hey, we feel like this social contract has been violated. We assume that there's going to be fairness. We assume there's going to be transparency. We assume that leaders are doing things for our best interest because that raises everybody up. But they weren't seeing that. And that's why they were backlash. That's why they were upset. So, okay, another differentiation that's important is this difference between leadership and management. Okay, so first let's talk about the things that are similar about leadership and management. Both influence followers. So, well, let me take a step back. The definition of management is about some degree of hierarchy. Okay, so you're going to have somebody within this organizational structure who is responsible for the work of an individual or more than one individual below them within the organizational structure. And that person below them is accountable. Their work has to be accountable to whatever the manager is looking for and needs them to do. Okay, so it's more about a structure. It's more about this organizational structure and who's where in the org chart. So again, they're similar in that they are influencing other people. Leaders influence non-leaders. And again, that doesn't have to be hierarchical. And then managers or supervisors or whatever you want to call them are influencing their subordinates or people within them or below them within the org chart. Both also help make sense of ambiguity. So leaders are charged with saying, here's the direction we want to go. Here's the collective goal. Here's how we're going to get there. Maybe that's by motivating people to get there. Maybe that's by helping people understand how to get there. And then managers, to some degree, do the same thing. Managers are responsible for making sure that they're planning and organizing and controlling. And so they're helping individuals understand, here's the priorities. Here's all the resources we have. Here's all the roles that need to be accomplished. Let's all do these things, and then we'll kind of come back together and see how it's working. And then also, they both involve getting goals accomplished. Leaders are influencing others towards common goals. Managers have some goal that arguably is coming from the top down that they are then responsible for ensuring that is completed through the human capital resources that they are involved with. Now, what are the differences? So management really is more about order and stability. These functions that they're involved in are usually more about planning and budgeting, organizing, staffing, controlling, problem solving. And so they're more so thinking about organizational resources, dividing them up, managing them, and controlling them. Where leadership doesn't necessarily have that same baggage that management does. It's really about trying to figure out how to initiate change, how to make something happen that is productive, that is positive, and doesn't necessarily have to be embedded within a system. It's about establishing direction, not necessarily monitoring the direction. And it's about using motivation and inspiration and getting people aligned to do whatever it is that needs to be done. Now, managers can certainly engage in leadership behaviors, which would be ideal, right? Hopefully, all of our managers that have some degree of authority and control or legitimate power would engage in proper leadership. But that doesn't always happen. Ideally, it does. And then on the other end, you can be a leader without being a manager. Because again, leadership is just influencing others towards some degree of constructive, positive goal that is collective. Right? So you can lead yourself, you could lead a peer, you could lead a colleague, you could be even leading your manager, theoretically, right? So you can lead in all sorts of different capacities. So let's talk about another important part of leadership, which is this recognition that you can also lead yourself. Okay, so if leadership is influencing others towards common goals, self-leadership is about leading yourself towards some self-set goal, right? So leading others versus leading the self, and then leading towards collective goals versus your own self-set goals. So within self-leadership, there is a process involved, just like leadership is a process, not a person. Self-leadership also follows a process, but it's a very specific process. The first step is self-awareness, which is when you understand your own personal characteristics. Your strengths, your weaknesses, your values, your motivation, your tendencies, or your personality characteristics, or whatever it might be. And then from there, once you have that sense of awareness, you know who you are and you know what you want to do, it increases the likelihood that you're engaged in appropriate self-regulation. So when you get into a circumstance and you have decisions to make, you can self-regulate and put yourself into the right position. You can make the right call. You can say no. You can say yes, whatever that decision point or behavior needs to be so that it aligns with whatever you want to do as a leader. Now, there's another part of this process, and it's called self-reflection. And it does two things. Number one, self-reflection can help change the nature of the relationship between self-awareness and self-regulation. So the degree to which self-awareness leads to self-regulation, right, that positive relationship, it can be enhanced through more self-reflection, right? This is just reconsidering who you are, how you did, what happened, what didn't work, and making sure that you're constantly kind of filling the bucket of self-awareness so that as you over time get into more and more situations where you might need to self-regulate, you're doing the right things because you've thought about it. You've put your mind in the best position to make the right call. It also has a direct effect on self-awareness, right? That process of self-reflection, whether it's filling out assessments, working with a coach, getting feedback from a mentor or manager, whatever it might be, journaling, you name it. All of that is self-reflection, which then helps you increase your self-awareness. Right, so that's the self-leadership process. In this class, we're going to come at leadership from both of these angles. We're going to talk about what is leadership, all these different styles of leadership, types of leadership, approaches to leadership. We'll talk about that. But at the same time, we're going to make sure that we put it into a framework that is helpful for you to grow and develop. And that's the self-leadership part, right? So understanding all these different theories and models and frameworks about leadership isn't really helpful unless we're applying it to us, right? And all of us are unique. So we're going to have to think through what works, what doesn't work, what our tendencies are, so that we can understand how to leverage this knowledge of leadership in a way that's going to help us in whatever our goals are and whatever our career decisions are. So that's the framework of the class, and that's what we're going to be focusing on. Both of them very important. You got to understand the language of leadership, but you also have to actually use it. You have to understand the practical application of thinking about all these different leadership topics. So that's it. Thanks.